Alaska is a land where history is written in ice, oceans, mountains, and migration. Standing at the edge of North America, it carries a past older than the United States itself, older than Russia, and older than recorded memory. Its story stretches from ancient indigenous nations who mastered Arctic survival to Russian explorers chasing wealth, and eventually to Americans who saw opportunity in what many once mocked as a frozen wasteland. Alaska is more than a state. It is a crossroads of global cultures, economies, and empires. Understanding its past means traveling through centuries of human resilience, conflict, discovery, and ambition. While many think of Alaska as a modern frontier, its human story began tens of thousands of years ago, long before maps, borders, or nations existed. Indigenous communities built thriving civilizations shaped by harsh environments and abundant wildlife. Later, Russia became the first foreign empire to lay claim to this land, seeing in it an untapped wealth of fur and resources. Their colonial rule would introduce new conflicts, alliances, and cultural exchanges, leaving a lasting mark on Alaska. Eventually, in one of the most surprising deals in world history, the United States purchased the territory for just $7.2 million, forever altering the region's political and economic future. The modern world tends to view Alaska through the lens of breathtaking wilderness or massive oil reserves, but its past reveals a deeper truth. Alaska has always been a place of strategic importance, where nations clash and cultures intersect. It played a major role during the Gold Rush, both world wars, the Cold War, and remains critical to global energy markets today. Yet even amid these dramatic transformations, Alaska's indigenous cultures continue to shape the identity of the state, preserving traditions that have survived for millennia. With this complex backdrop, Alaska stands as one of the most fascinating historical landscapes on Earth. Alaska's earliest history begins during the last ice age, when massive glaciers locked up much of the world's water and lowered sea levels drastically. Between Siberia and Alaska lay a vast stretch of exposed land known as Beringia, a bridge that connected Asia and North America. Rather than a sheet of ice, Beringia was a grassland rich with wildlife: mammoths, bison, wolves, and prehistoric horses, making it ideal for human migration. Between 20,000 and 30,000 years ago, some of the world's first migrants crossed into what is now Alaska, likely following herds of animals in search of food. These early people were highly adaptive hunter-gatherers who possessed deep knowledge of survival in extreme climates. They constructed shelters, crafted sophisticated tools, and developed ways to process meat and animal skins under Arctic conditions. Research suggests some groups lived in Beringia itself for thousands of years before spreading into the wider continent. These migrants became the ancestors of many indigenous nations throughout North and South America, marking Alaska as a gateway in humanity's long global journey. Their arrival set the foundation for Alaska's indigenous cultures, many of which still thrive today. As the climate warmed and glaciers receded, Alaska transformed into a mosaic of diverse environments: tundra, mountains, dense forests, islands, and river systems. Indigenous communities adapted uniquely to their surroundings, developing distinct languages, technologies, and spiritual traditions. The Inupiat in the far north became expert marine hunters who pursued whales, seals, and walrus across Arctic waters. They built ingenious tools and developed winter survival strategies that astonished early European observers. Their knowledge of ice, weather patterns, and animal migrations allowed them to thrive in what outsiders saw as an uninhabitable world. The Yupik peoples of western Alaska lived along rivers and coastal deltas, rich in salmon, waterfowl, and caribou. Their seasonal migrations aligned with the rhythms of nature, and their communities valued cooperation, storytelling, and ceremonial gatherings. Meanwhile, The Aleut Unangax people inhabited the wind-swept Aleutian Islands, mastering the art of open ocean navigation. Their bidarkas, light, maneuverable sea kayaks, were so advanced that Russian explorers later incorporated their design. Further inland, the Athabascan nations lived throughout interior Alaska, hunting caribou and moose across vast mountain ranges and developing complex trade relationships. In southeastern Alaska, the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian built some of the most sophisticated societies on the continent. Their cultures revolved around clan systems, potlatch ceremonies, carved totem poles, and cedar longhouses that could house extended families. Their artwork, now recognized worldwide, held deep symbolic meaning tied to lineage, myth, and spiritual beliefs. These groups commanded trade networks stretching hundreds of miles along the Pacific coast, trading copper, obsidian, carved items, and preserved foods. Warfare and diplomacy were integral to maintaining power, and these coastal nations defended their territories fiercely. These indigenous societies were far from isolated or primitive. They built political alliances, engaged in long-distance trade, and developed technologies suited perfectly to their environments. Long before Europeans arrived, Alaska was home to vibrant nations with rich histories. Their knowledge of the land would shape interactions with newcomers and influence Alaska's future far more deeply than early colonizers expected. When Russian ships appeared on the horizon in the 1700s, they were stepping into lands that had been managed and understood for thousands of years. By the 1600s, the Russian Empire had already conquered vast territories across Siberia, driven by the lure of furs, especially sable, which was highly valued in Europe and China. As Russian explorers reached the Pacific coast, rumors spread of rich islands filled with sea otters, whose pelts were considered the finest in the world. These pelts were incredibly valuable, sometimes worth more than gold. The potential profits enticed traders, adventurers, and the imperial government itself to explore the unknown regions beyond Siberia. Russia's leaders, particularly under Peter the Great, sought to transform the empire into a major maritime and scientific power. They commissioned expeditions to map the coastline, chart routes, and assess commercial possibilities. The Pacific was seen not only as a source of wealth, but also as a stage for imperial competition with Britain and Spain. This ambition set the stage for Russia's eventual encounter with Alaska, a territory that would become a small but symbolically important part of their empire. To expand Russia's geographic knowledge, Peter the Great appointed Vitus Bering, a Danish navigator in Russian service, to lead the Great Northern Expedition. In 1728, Bering sailed north from Siberia and passed through the strait that now bears his name, proving that Asia and North America were separate continents. However, he did not see the Alaskan coastline on that voyage. It wasn't until 1741, during a second expedition, that Bering and his crew finally reached Alaska's southern shores. The expedition brought scientists, naturalists, and cartographers who recorded detailed observations about Alaska's wildlife, geography, and indigenous peoples. They encountered towering mountains, dense forests, and abundant sea otter populations. Although Bering died on the return journey, his expedition opened the door to regular Russian contact. The reports they brought back ignited a rush among Russian merchants eager to capitalize on the lucrative fur trade, setting off a period of rapid and often ruthless expansion into Alaska. Following Bering's return, independent Russian fur hunters known as promyshlenniki sailed to Alaska in increasing numbers. They hunted sea otters with little regulation, often driving the animals to near extinction in some areas. The traders frequently forced indigenous communities into labor, demanding that they hunt otters and provide food. This exploitation led to significant suffering and tension among native communities, many of whom had never encountered outsiders before. As the fur trade grew, Russia struggled to maintain control over its expanding frontier. The government created the Russian-American Company in 1799, a commercial monopoly granted authority to manage colonies, control trade, and administer justice. The company's presence brought more structure, but it also reinforced the exploitation of both indigenous labor and natural resources. Contact between Russians and native peoples led to disease outbreaks, population loss, and cultural disruption. Yet alliances and intermarriage also occurred, leading to mixed communities that blended elements of Russian and native traditions. The Russian-American Company established its headquarters in Sitka, located in the southeastern coastal region. The site was chosen for its strategic location and abundant natural resources. Sitka gradually transformed into the center of Russian colonial life, complete with administrative buildings, trade warehouses, Orthodox churches, and European-style homes. Russian officials sought to create a functioning colony, but conditions were harsh, and supplies from Russia were infrequent and unpredictable. Despite efforts to build a strong settlement, Russian Alaska never attracted large numbers of immigrants. At its height, only a few hundred Russians lived in the territory, outnumbered dramatically by indigenous populations. Many Russians intermarried with native women, forming Creole communities that played an important role in bridging cultural gaps. For much of its existence, Russian Alaska was economically fragile, dependent on indigenous labor and subject to extreme weather, supply shortages, and dangerous voyages. Relations between Russians and indigenous groups varied greatly. In southeastern Alaska, the powerful Tlingit people resisted Russian encroachment on their territory. Tensions erupted into violence in 1802 when the Tlingit attacked and destroyed the Russian settlement at Old Sitka. This conflict revealed the limits of Russian authority and the strength of native resistance. 2 years later, the Russians returned with reinforcements and fought the Battle of Sitka, re-establishing their settlement but failing to fully control the region. Despite these conflicts, diplomacy and cooperation also played key roles. Many Russian administrators recognized the importance of forming alliances with native peoples. Trade relationships developed, and some Russian leaders adopted more humane policies. However, the Russian-American Company's focus on fur profits often overshadowed diplomatic efforts, leading to repeated abuses. The impact on indigenous communities was severe, with population losses caused by disease, forced labor, and exploitation. By the mid-1800s, Russia's Alaskan colony was in decline. Overhunting had depleted sea otter populations, undermining the economic foundation of the fur trade. Shipping routes from Siberia were long and expensive, and Russia lacked the naval strength to protect Alaska effectively. At the same time, tensions with Britain, whose empire controlled neighboring Canada, raised fears that Russia might lose Alaska in a war without compensation. Facing financial difficulties and geopolitical risks, Russian leaders began considering the sale of Alaska. They saw the United States as a friendly power that could counterbalance British influence in the region. Discussions about selling the territory began in the 1850s, but were delayed by the Crimean War and other political issues. By the 1860s, however, the idea gained momentum, setting the stage for a historic transfer of land between two global powers. After the American Civil War, the United States was eager to expand its presence in the Pacific. Secretary of State William H. Seward believed strongly in American expansionism and saw Alaska as strategically valuable. When Russian diplomats approached Seward with an offer to sell the territory, he embraced the opportunity. Negotiations moved quickly, driven by mutual interest and a shared desire to limit British influence in North America. On March 30, 1867, the United States agreed to purchase Alaska for $7.2 million, roughly 2 cents per acre. The treaty included the transfer of Russian property, forts, and buildings, though it made almost no mention of indigenous rights. The agreement represented one of the largest territorial acquisitions in U.S. history and marked the end of Russia's presence in North America. It also signaled a new phase in Alaska's development, though few at the time understood its long-term significance. The American public did not share Seward's enthusiasm. Newspapers mocked the purchase, calling Alaska a barren wasteland filled with icebergs and polar bears. Critics labeled the deal Seward's folly and argued that the government had wasted money desperately needed for post-Civil War reconstruction. Politicians questioned the economic value of the territory, believing it held little promise for settlement or resource extraction. Despite the ridicule, Seward remained convinced that Alaska would one day prove invaluable. He emphasized its abundant natural resources, fisheries, timber, and strategic location near Asia. Over time, history would prove Seward's vision correct. But in 1867, the purchase was widely misunderstood. On October 18th of that year, the United States formally took control of the territory, lowering the Russian flag in Sitka and marking the beginning of American rule. For many years after the purchase, Alaska remained isolated and sparsely governed. The U.S. military provided limited administration, while traders, missionaries, and explorers trickled into the region. Communication with the lower 48 states was slow, and transportation was difficult. To most Americans, Alaska seemed distant and unimportant, a frozen curiosity rather than a valuable asset. Yet beneath the surface, Alaska held immense potential. Its fisheries were among the richest in the world. Its forests stretched for millions of acres, and its mineral wealth remained largely undiscovered. The transformation that would reveal Alaska's true value was only a few decades away, waiting for a discovery that would ignite global excitement and forever change the region's future. In 1896, everything changed when gold was discovered in the Klondike region of northwestern Canada, near Alaska's border. Although the discovery itself happened in Canada's Yukon Territory, the main route to the gold fields ran directly through Alaska. Almost overnight, newspapers around the world announced the finding, igniting one of the largest human migrations in North American history. Thousands of people, from farmers to businessmen to dreamers, rushed north, hoping to strike it rich. Their arrival would permanently reshape both the Alaskan landscape and the territory's importance to the United States. Alaskan towns like Skagway, Dyea, and Nome became booming gateways for prospectors heading toward the Yukon. Steamships filled with excited travelers arrived daily, and makeshift camps appeared along the coasts and mountain passes. The journey, however, was far more dangerous than most expected. The most infamous route was the Chilkoot Trail, where stampeders climbed an impossibly steep, icy slope with more than 1,000 pounds of required supplies. Photographs from the time show endless lines of miners ascending the Golden Stairs, a haunting testament to the harsh realities of the gold rush. Many never made it to the gold fields, but their struggle forever imprinted Alaska in the global imagination. While the Klondike discovery sparked the initial frenzy, Alaska soon experienced its own gold strikes. In 1898, gold was found near the town of Nome, drawing tens of thousands of miners directly into Alaskan territory. Nome became one of the most chaotic and lively towns in the entire region, filled with gamblers, entrepreneurs, adventurers, and lawless gangs. Its beaches were lined with miners sifting through sands rich with fine gold. For several years, Nome was the largest and most profitable gold rush town in Alaska, producing millions of dollars in gold and attracting fortune seekers from all around the world. Other gold discoveries took place in Fairbanks, Valdez, and along the Yukon River. Fairbanks, in particular, grew into one of Alaska's most important cities after gold was found there in 1902. Soon, Alaska had transformed from a remote, sparsely populated territory into a frontier filled with opportunity, industry, and migration. The gold rush brought railroads, telegraph lines, permanent settlements, and increased federal interest, laying the foundation for Alaska's future economic growth. Yet the gold rush era also brought conflicts, environmental damage, and the displacement of many indigenous communities whose lands were overrun by miners. The sudden influx of people created lawless conditions across the territory. Skagway, in particular, gained a reputation as a violent boomtown ruled by the criminal gang of Soapy Smith, a notorious con man who controlled gambling, mail fraud, and protection rackets. His unchecked power showed how little formal governance existed in Alaska at the time. It took vigilante groups and eventually federal marshals to restore order. The showdown that led to Soapy Smith's death in 1898 marked a turning point for the rule of law in the region. As the gold rush continued, the U.S. government strengthened its presence. Courts were established, military posts were expanded, and efforts were made to control crime and regulate mining. While many miners left disappointed, the infrastructure they helped create remained. Alaska was no longer an ignored territory. It had become a crucial part of America's frontier economy. When the gold rush faded, fishing, logging, and trapping industries rose to prominence, but Alaska would never again return to the obscurity it once knew. From the time of the Alaska Purchase in 1867 until 1912, Alaska was governed loosely under military authority and later as a district with limited self-rule. The region desperately needed organized law and stable governance, especially as its population grew due to mining, fishing, and trade. In 1912, Alaska officially became a U.S. territory, granting residents more political rights and formalizing the territory's legal structure. However, full political equality with the rest of the United States remained out of reach, as Congress retained major control over budget decisions and local affairs. The early territorial government faced enormous challenges. The vast size of Alaska, combined with limited transportation networks, made administration difficult. Many remote communities were accessible only by boat, sled, or dangerous overland trails. Despite these obstacles, Alaska's territorial status encouraged investment and infrastructure. Railroads expanded, particularly the Alaska Railroad connecting Seward and Fairbanks, and new towns developed along trade routes. The fishing industry also boomed during this period, with salmon canneries becoming major economic drivers across coastal regions. Christian missionaries played a complicated role in Alaska's early American era. Many schools for Indigenous children were run by religious organizations, which often suppressed native languages and cultural practices in favor of Western education. While missionaries provided literacy and basic education, their presence also contributed to cultural loss and the marginalization of Indigenous identity. Yet some Indigenous leaders recognized the importance of English language education as a tool for political advocacy and economic opportunity. The relationship between Indigenous communities and missionary institutions remains a deeply complex chapter in Alaska's history. Missionaries also introduced Christianity across the territory, blending it with local traditions in some communities. The impact varied widely, with some native people embracing new religious forms, while others resisted cultural upheaval. Over time, Indigenous activism grew stronger, especially in the mid-20th century, as Native Alaskans fought for land rights, cultural preservation, and political representation. This activism would play a major role in shaping modern Alaska and its laws. The early 20th century brought increasing federal investment in Alaska's infrastructure. Roads, railways, and communication lines expanded, connecting once isolated regions and encouraging commercial growth. Global wars later boosted Alaska's strategic importance, prompting further investment in airfields, military bases, and logistical networks. In the fishing industry, salmon canning became one of the territory's most profitable activities, though overfishing and environmental issues prompted new regulations. Despite these improvements, Alaska remained somewhat neglected in national policy. Many residents felt that Congress treated the territory as a resource colony rather than a developing region deserving full rights. This frustration fueled early statehood movements. though success would not come until after World War II. For decades, Alaska's identity as a territory was defined by a mix of economic growth, limited political power, and increasing strategic importance. World War II brought Alaska into the center of global conflict for the first time in history. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Japanese military turned its attention northward, recognizing Alaska's potential as a strategic location. In 1942, Japanese forces invaded the Aleutian Islands, occupying Attu and Kiska, the first time since the War of 1812 that foreign forces occupied American soil. The Aleutian Campaign became one of the most grueling and difficult battles of the entire Pacific War. American troops, along with Canadian forces, launched a campaign to reclaim the islands. The harsh weather, fog, freezing temperatures, and hurricane-force winds proved as deadly as the fighting itself. The Battle of Attu in 1943 was brutally intense, with soldiers fighting through mud, ice, and mountain terrain. After weeks of combat, U.S. forces retook the island, but at a devastating human cost. When American forces landed at Kiska shortly after, they discovered that the Japanese had already evacuated, leaving behind booby traps and abandoned fortifications. Beyond the Aleutian Campaign, Alaska played a significant logistical role in the war effort. The United States constructed the Alaska Highway, a 1,700-mile road connecting Alaska to the lower 48 states through Canada, in just 8 months, a remarkable engineering achievement. Airfields were constructed for the Lend-Lease program, in which American aircraft were flown to Alaska and transferred to Soviet pilots for use on the Eastern Front. Alaska became a major military hub, filled with soldiers, engineers, and supplies moving in and out of the Pacific. The war dramatically increased Alaska's population and infrastructure. Military building projects transformed towns like Anchorage and Fairbanks, creating new industries and jobs. For many Alaskans, World War II was the first time the federal government invested heavily in the region. The presence of thousands of soldiers and workers exposed Alaska to new cultures, technologies, and economic opportunities, laying the groundwork for post-war growth and eventual statehood. While the war brought jobs and infrastructure, it also disrupted indigenous communities. During the Japanese invasion, the U.S. government forced Aleut civilians from their homes and relocated them to internment camps in southeast Alaska. Conditions in these camps were harsh and unsanitary, leading to illness and death. After the war, many Aleut communities returned to homes that had been destroyed or damaged. Their experience remains one of the most tragic chapters in Alaskan history, highlighting the human cost of global conflict on small, vulnerable communities. Despite these hardships, Indigenous people also served bravely in the military, contributing to Alaska's defense. Their knowledge of the land proved invaluable during scouting and patrol missions. Their service earned respect nationwide and strengthened calls for greater civil rights and political recognition in the post-war era. Alaska emerged from World War II as both a strategically vital region and a place demanding national attention and investment. After World War II, the world entered the Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. Alaska's proximity to the USSR made it one of the most strategically important regions in the entire country. The U.S. military expanded air bases, radar stations, and early warning systems across the territory. The DW Line, Distant Early Warning Line, was constructed along the Arctic coast, designed to detect Soviet aircraft or missiles approaching North America. Massive air bases were built in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and other locations, bringing new jobs and accelerating population growth. Alaska became a frontline state in the global struggle between the superpowers. Military investment transformed Anchorage into Alaska's largest city and brought modern infrastructure to regions that had been isolated for centuries. The Cold War elevated Alaska into a critical position within American defense strategy, ensuring that federal funding continued to flow into the state. During the early Cold War years, the United States conducted plans for nuclear testing in parts of Alaska, including islands in the Aleutian chain. Although some tests were eventually canceled due to environmental concerns and local resistance, a few underwater nuclear detonations did occur. These events sparked fear among indigenous communities and environmental activists, raising long-term concerns about contamination and ecological damage. Alaska became part of a broader national debate about nuclear weapons and environmental protection. The Cold War also saw scientific exploration of the Arctic, as the United States sought to better understand the region's climate, geology, and strategic potential. Research stations were built, and projects like the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline were influenced partly by national security concerns. Alaska's role in the Cold War highlighted the intersection of military necessity, environmental risk, and economic development, issues that continue to shape policy debates today. Military spending brought economic stability to Alaska, but the state still needed long-term industries to support its population. Fishing, forestry, and mining remained important, but Alaska's true economic revolution arrived in the late 1960s with one of the most significant discoveries in U.S. history: vast oil reserves on the North Slope. This discovery would reshape Alaska's economic future and push the state toward modern identity and self-governance. The Cold War prepared Alaska with infrastructure and federal attention, but oil would transform it into a global energy powerhouse. In 1968, geologists working near Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope confirmed the largest oil field ever discovered in North America. Estimates revealed billions of barrels of recoverable oil, enough to change the economic destiny of the entire state. The discovery attracted national attention. As the United States faced increasing reliance on foreign oil and rising geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, Alaska was suddenly viewed not just as a remote frontier, but as a critical energy resource for the country. The challenge, however, was how to transport the oil from the Arctic coast to markets thousands of miles away. The solution became one of the most ambitious engineering projects in American history: the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, TAPS. This 800-mile pipeline would stretch from Prudhoe Bay to the port of Valdez, crossing mountains, rivers, and permafrost. Building it required unprecedented innovation, including elevated sections designed to prevent melting the frozen ground beneath. The project would transform Alaska's landscape, economy, and political influence for generations. Construction of the pipeline began in 1974, following years of environmental lawsuits, engineering studies, and political debate. The project attracted tens of thousands of workers from across the nation, creating temporary boom towns along the route. Engineers faced extreme weather, blizzards, sub-zero temperatures, and rugged terrain that challenged even the most advanced machinery. Despite these obstacles, the pipeline was completed in just over 3 years, finishing in 1977. The pipeline's completion marked a turning point in Alaska's history. Oil began flowing south to Valdez, where tankers transported it to refineries. Revenues from oil production transformed Alaska's finances, allowing the state to eliminate income taxes and invest in infrastructure, education, and public services. To ensure that residents benefited from the oil wealth, Alaska established the Permanent Fund, a savings account for future generations. Today, the Permanent Fund dividend provides yearly payments to eligible residents, a unique economic feature rarely seen elsewhere. The oil boom brought prosperity, but also significant environmental risks. Concerns grew over oil spills, habitat disruption, and the long-term impact of industrial development on fragile Arctic ecosystems. The threat became reality in 1989, when the Exxon Valdez oil tanker struck a reef in Prince William Sound, causing one of the worst environmental disasters in U.S. history. The spill polluted hundreds of miles of coastline, killing wildlife and devastating local fisheries. Its impact is still felt today, serving as a sobering reminder of the environmental costs of oil dependence. In response, new regulations and safety standards were implemented, including double-hulled tankers and improved navigation systems. The Exxon Valdez disaster reshaped public attitudes toward environmental protection and highlighted the need for balance between economic development and ecological stewardship. Alaska's identity became tied not only to its oil wealth, but also to a growing awareness of the fragility of its natural landscapes. By the mid-20th century, Alaska's residents were increasingly frustrated with territorial status. Although they were U.S. citizens, they had limited representation in Congress and little control over local decisions. Many felt that Alaska was treated as an economic colony, where resources were exploited without adequate investment in communities. The experiences of World War II strengthened the statehood movement, as Alaskans realized the strategic importance of their region and demanded full participation in national affairs. Leaders like Ernest Gruening and Bob Bartlett championed the cause, arguing that Alaska deserved equal rights and opportunities. They campaigned tirelessly, and in 1955, Alaskans voted overwhelmingly to draft a state constitution. The document, created at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, was praised for its clarity, modern design, and strong environmental protections. With momentum building, the U.S. Congress finally passed the Alaska Statehood Act in 1958. On January 3, 1959, Alaska officially became the 49th state of the United States. Statehood brought new responsibilities and challenges. Alaska now had to balance economic development with environmental protection, manage its growing population, and build political institutions capable of handling the vast needs of the state. The discovery of oil in the 1960s accelerated economic growth, providing revenue for roads, schools, airports, and public services. Anchorage grew rapidly, becoming the state's commercial and transportation hub, while Fairbanks and Juneau continued to play important government and economic roles. Alaska's young legislature faced pressure from both industry groups and indigenous communities. Debates over land rights, natural resource management, and environmental policy became central issues. The federal government retained ownership of many lands, complicating local governance. Yet statehood gave Alaska the tools it needed to negotiate policy changes, protect its interests, and shape its future development. Over time, Alaska became known for its unique political identity: independent, resource-rich, and deeply influenced by wilderness values. One of the most significant developments of Alaska's early statehood era was the rise of indigenous activism. Native communities advocated for land rights, cultural preservation, and fair treatment under state and federal law. These efforts culminated in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, ANCSA, of 1971, which recognized native land ownership and created regional native corporations to manage economic development. ANCSA became one of the largest and most influential indigenous land settlements in history, reshaping the political and economic landscape of the state. Beyond land rights, indigenous organizations focused on reviving languages, traditions, and cultural practices that had been suppressed during earlier colonial eras. Schools, cultural centers, and museums were established to preserve heritage. Elders played a central role in teaching cultural values to younger generations. Today, Alaska's indigenous nations remain vital contributors to the state's cultural identity, economic development, and environmental decision-making. Modern Alaska is a rich tapestry of cultures, combining indigenous heritage with influences from Russia, Scandinavia, Asia, and the rest of the United States. Cities like Anchorage are home to diverse communities, while rural villages maintain traditional ways of life rooted in subsistence hunting and fishing. The coexistence of traditional and modern lifestyles makes Alaska unique, as people navigate the challenges of globalization while preserving cultural continuity. Festivals, dance traditions, storytelling events, and native art have become key parts of Alaska's cultural landscape. Museums and cultural centers highlight the histories and achievements of Alaska's indigenous nations, while new generations of artists explore both traditional and contemporary forms. Alaska's cultural diversity is one of its greatest strengths, shaping everything from food to politics to community life. Oil remains Alaska's most important economic driver, contributing billions of dollars annually. The North Slope continues to produce significant quantities of petroleum, and debates persist over potential drilling in environmentally sensitive areas like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, ANWR. Meanwhile, commercial fishing, especially salmon, halibut, and crab, supports thousands of jobs and sustains many coastal communities. Alaska's waters remain some of the most productive fisheries in the world, though climate change poses new threats to marine ecosystems. Tourism has also become a major part of Alaska's economy. Millions of visitors arrive each year on cruise ships, airplanes, and road trips to see glaciers, wildlife, mountains, and national parks. Towns like Juneau, Ketchikan, and Denali National Park experience seasonal booms in economic activity. Adventure tourism, such as hiking, kayaking, and northern lights viewing, has grown rapidly, making Alaska one of the most iconic natural destinations on Earth. Alaska faces significant environmental challenges, many linked to climate change. Glaciers are retreating, sea ice is melting, and coastal erosion threatens entire villages. The warming Arctic also affects wildlife migration patterns, fisheries, and traditional subsistence lifestyles. Indigenous communities are at the forefront of climate adaptation efforts, often combining scientific research with traditional ecological knowledge to develop strategies for resilience. Environmental policy remains a contentious issue, balancing economic needs with ecological preservation. Debates over oil drilling, mining, logging, and conservation reflect broader national tensions. Alaska's vast wilderness areas make it central to global conversations about environmental stewardship, biodiversity, and climate change mitigation. In the modern era, Alaska continues to play a crucial role in national defense. Military bases remain active across the state, and the Arctic has become a region of renewed international interest due to melting sea ice and emerging shipping routes. As global powers such as Russia and China increase their presence in the Arctic, Alaska functions as a critical American outpost for security and international cooperation. The region is becoming a focal point for new economic opportunities, scientific research, and geopolitical strategy. Scientific research in Alaska is also increasing, with major studies focusing on Arctic weather patterns, ocean currents, permafrost thawing, and wildlife conservation. This research is essential for understanding global climate dynamics. Universities, government agencies, and international scientists collaborate on projects that position Alaska as a hub for Arctic knowledge. The state's role in science and policy continues to expand as environmental concerns grow worldwide. Looking forward, Alaska's strength lies in its resilience, both human and environmental. Indigenous communities continue to assert cultural sovereignty while participating in state and national politics. Their leadership in land management, language revitalization, and cultural education ensures that Alaska's heritage remains strong. Economic diversification efforts are exploring renewable energy, sustainable fisheries, and technological innovation as potential paths forward. Despite challenges, Alaskans share a deep sense of pride in their land. The combination of breathtaking landscapes, cultural richness, and a spirit of independence shapes Alaska's identity. Whether confronting climate change, navigating economic transitions, or addressing geopolitical shifts, Alaskans continue to demonstrate adaptability rooted in centuries of tradition. Alaska's history is a story of extremes, ancient migrations across icy land bridges, indigenous civilizations mastering harsh landscapes, colonial ambition from distant empires, and a dramatic transformation into one of the most important regions of the modern United States. From the Bering Land Bridge to the Russian fur trade, from the thrilling gold rush to the battles of World War II, from the tension of the Cold War to the discovery of vast oil reserves, Alaska's story is defined by resilience, conflict, opportunity, and constant change. Today, Alaska stands as a place where ancient traditions coexist with modern industry, where natural beauty meets strategic importance, and where cultural diversity enriches community life. Its future will be shaped by the balance between economic development and environmental protection, the preservation of indigenous heritage, and the challenges of a rapidly changing Arctic. Alaska remains a symbol of both the enduring power of nature and the extraordinary capacity of human societies to adapt and thrive. Its epic story continues to unfold, one shaped by courage, exploration, and the timeless spirit of the North. Alaska's story is powerful, and there's so much more to discover. If this video inspired you, please like, comment, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves history.